think it was your place to be attending that session, where obviously meeting and engaging with the business sector. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, as you know, being in the news doesn't make all news good news. And the latter part of what you said there is certainly not good news, because the person who had said that I was out of place to be in Trinidad obviously didn't understand the role of the Prime Minister of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. He can't speak for the government of Guyana and shouldn't be speaking for the Prime Minister of Guyana. I had a legitimate reason to be there with a team of ministers and the Mayor of Georgetown to speak to and with investors. Trinidadians have been among the longest investors in Guyana, even during the lean times. And it gave us a platform personally for me to thank those investors who had stayed the course in Guyana and welcome those who have shown eagerness to come to Guyana. As I said, as Trinidadians will say in their own way, we is family. It's not about you and we. We belong to the CARICOM family. We belong to the Commonwealth family. And in welcoming them to Guyana, I was doing the duty as a CARICOM citizen, as a Guyanese citizen, and as a Guyanese leader to share our vision with our brothers and sisters in Trinidad, our neighbor, literally, and by extension, the wider Caribbean, our family in the Caribbean, is that there is a role that they can play within the plan that we have for Guyana, within our strategy, within our vision, to secure opportunities for investment. They have experience, and therefore we count on them as partners. We have a similar history, political history. We have similar ethnicities. We have a unique Caribbean culture that we share, and so I had every reason to be there. So I'm sorry for the guy who wanted me to become an un-CARICOM citizen. No, I can't be that. And I welcome the opportunity to have gone to Trinidad and delivered a message from His Excellency President David Granger that our arms are wide open, our hearts are very large and warm to welcome our CARICOM and Trinidadian brothers and sisters to partake of the opportunities arising in this country.
And another issue that, of course, you had cause to write about recently, and asked first for the Minister of Public Health to touch on this, and for you to actually respond or to add if necessary. And that is the issue recently with the opening of the new government drugs bond. Subsequently to it, some of your statements made publicly. There was a full-page, almost full-page article that was taken out accusing the Prime Minister of actually being, what should we call it, bad-minded, so to speak, to those persons because the government is now having their own bond. And the U.S. Prime Minister did explain some of the circumstances in your column, that it was necessary for a government to have their own bond for drugs due to the fact that you had certain difficulties. Minister, first off, I'd like to ask you to explain or elaborate on what those difficulties are and why you took this route before Prime Minister actually responds to those allegations.
Thank you so much, Stan, and I'm very happy to share with our viewers and listeners the position taken by the Ministry of Public Health and the government by extension to have their own bond. This is just one of the many bonds that we are thinking about. First, let me say that. Secondly, that the government, through the Ministry of Public Health, procure drugs for our health system across the 10 administrative regions. We're not talking about a couple of boxes or a couple of bottles. We're talking about billions of dollars in drugs and medical supplies. The fact that our Constitution speaks to all Guyanese being able to access health and access health freely means that government will continue to provide this service. They will continue to purchase drugs and medical supplies until we change that in the Constitution. So the sensible thing to do is to ensure that you invest in storage capacity for the storage of your drugs and medical supply. To rent, if you had a private business, you wouldn't be doing that. If you are going to be in this business for many, many years to come, the sensible thing will be to ensure that you have your space. And that is what we've set out to do. This bond in Kingston is one, it's a whole compound first, let me say that. It is used by both the Ministry of Public Health and the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation. Apart from us having our equipment and other supplies in that bond, we also have an area where we do bulk storage that is separate from that large building that you saw. We also now have a storage capacity for our medical gas. We also now have a storage capacity to ensure that all of our vaccines are placed in a specific place in accordance with the standards that are required for keeping them there. So it's an entire compound. And this is the vision of government, to ensure that we spend smart, that we get value for our money, and that we continue to provide the adequacy in terms of us being able to meet the storage regulations of Guyana. And so all of that is captured in what we have done.
So would you say that therefore that maybe obviously taking it out of the hands of private businesses is perhaps one of the things that causes people to be a little upset?
Perhaps. I wouldn't say that I'm sure about that. But just think about yourself, a young man. If you were to ask me advice about renting a home or buying one, I would tell you to go right ahead and buy a home, because I expect that your life expectancy will be going for many, many more moons. And so the best thing to do is to invest now in a property instead of paying rent. You could use that same money to pay your mortgage. And this is the thinking behind what we do at the Ministry of Public Health. Spend smart and get value for money.
All right, and Minister, of course, one of the persons that, like we made mention of, after that, when you were there for the opening of that bond, Mr. Larry Singh took umbrage at your words, and you had cause to actually write to explain in your column. For the benefit of those who might not have seen it, if you could put in a nutshell where you were coming from, and maybe answer the question, because based on that, it indicated that you perhaps were a beneficiary of some sort of kickbacks.
Yeah, well, as I said in the beginning, not all news is good news. And here it was where I was misinterpreted as to exactly what I had said. I was dealing with the historical background for this $550 million government medical supplies bond. And I placed into context a conversation I had with Dr. Bobby Ramroop, the CEO of New GPC, where government used to store medical supplies. And we were confronted with the situation after we got into office that he wanted his bond back. Because of a peculiar reason, that he was the beneficiary, his company was the beneficiary of what was called sole sourcing. Billions of dollars were going to a single company that would bring in the medical supplies and other medical related equipment, etc., and then would deliver them to the government. So they had to have a storage facility. And when we got in, we changed the procedure and had competitive bidding. So everyone now had to bid and give their price, etc., etc. So new GPC said that they wanted a bond. Also, if you needed the bond, there was a heavy price that was demanded of $9 million from the Ministry of Public Health, and also another $9 million per month from the Guyana Public Hospital Corporation, roughly about $19 million a month. And the bond was available as a single unit. So I met him, and I spoke to him at length and pleaded with him that, look, we don't have any way we can store new supplies. And they were, as soon as we got in, some of it exaggerated claims that there were drug shortages in different parts of the country. And even members of the parliament, opposition members, would stand in the parliament and talk about medical supplies being in short supply. And so you had that pressure on you to find storage facilities. So I went and I spoke with him. And he told me during the conversation, I said, at least make a part of the bond available to us. And he said he will send me some document, which he did. And the document was actually saying that, look, you, in order to benefit from the air conditioning and special facilities, you need to rent the whole bond. But the price that was being asked was very exorbitant in my mind. So I explained that it was in that context that we were forced, with our back against the wall, out of necessity, to rent somewhere, which I said at that point was literally a house converted into a bond. So the newspapers were attacking us that we got a 6 for a 9 and that we didn't get a good deal. But I had to introduce the context in which we had to rent that particular facility. There was no attack on my part on the facility. I gave the context. So the gentleman took me out of context, misrepresented what I said, and flew into this advertisement in the same papers that were attacking him for having pulled off a bad deal with the government. And they ran his ads, and he said that, oh, you know, I knew him so long, and et cetera, and I must have benefited from largesse from his business.
Did you?
I never. I knew this gentleman over many years. He was a Bales bondsman at one time. When I was in the Guyana Airways Corporation, I knew him. He was attached to, in some way or the other, with J2000. I must have met him after I went on the inaugural flight. I went to his business once with a group of journalists, and we had a lunch, post-meeting lunch, and we paid for what we ate at his restaurant. So I don't know what largesse he talked about, and the imputation that he made. For me, he has a clear opportunity of retracting the statements he made. Obviously, he worked on bad advice, but I don't think he used those words. He went to the front page for that reason, what I said at the bond. There would have been another reason. I think he's setting himself up for probably some more money from the government, but I'm not going to go into that. On the other side, Dr. Ramroop went to the press, his press, and paper, and said that he never spoke with me. Well, the paper had called me a liar, and I just asked the question, now who is the liar? Because I released his letter in which it confirmed that he had had discussions with me. And therefore, not everything you see in the press would appear to be truthful or factual. And you have to use this opportunity to respond. But in this case, I believe on the part of both of these gentlemen, if I can call them gentlemen, for the defamatory attack they made on the Prime Minister of a country, that they should know that there is a limit to freedom of expression. It doesn't give you the right to call people liar or to impute that they're taking bribes or kickbacks. And so they have what you'll do in circumstances like this is to retract those statements and to apologize.
All right, Minister Lawrence, when this issue about the entire, the same bonding Sussex Street actually came out, and we talk about the press, had certainly had a field day with that, and one of the things that came out is that maybe because of his political association with your party is why he was able to get such a contract. I know you would have had several press conferences to address that issue, but would you like to at least be able to put that to rest at this time?
Well, first let me say I was not the minister at that time. When the matter was raised in the parliament, the Minister of Health did speak to it. There was a contract with the gentleman, so it wasn't anything to hide about. There was a contract for which the ministry would have had to be given authority to pay. So all of those are documents that are within the ministry and within the general government system. I think that there were many attacks on the minister and the government at that time. Many things were said without the facts. You heard Prime Minister reference to space, the need for space urgently to be able to store the drugs and medical supplies. And in health, there are some drugs and medical supplies that must be stored under some particular conditions. And so you can't just go place them anywhere. And I think that the government and the minister did ventilate this particular issue out there. In 2017, when I became Minister of Public Health, this matter was still rolling in the press, and with the opposition continuing in their usual way to stir up every ant's nest that they think they can find. And I did say to the press that we will stop the renting of this bond by the end of the year. And that was our position. Records will bear us out that when we went to budget, which went to the National Assembly in November of 2017, that we did have in that budget allocations for the building of our bond in Kingston and also for the extension of our bond at Diamond. And so what we have witnessed in the last couple of weeks, the opening of that bond, is the fulfillment of the government's promise to do so. Secondly, if I go back to the bond, again the question was asked whether the bond was given up to the owner, whether we have exited the bond. And I did indicate that we did not. At one time we had 2 CT scanners there that were donated for the New Amsterdam Hospital and the other for Bartical Hospital. Subsequently, the New Amsterdam CT scan was removed in New Amsterdam, but at Bartica, they had to build a room to house that CT scan. And that took the region some time. And as a result of that, we went over the year in terms of occupying the building. That said and done, very quickly we were able to remove the CT scan to Bartica upon completion of that room, and the bond was given up to its owner.
All right. Let's turn our attention now to some of the other current issues. Prime Minister, if you would like to take this one, it is, as you know, we would have had a no confidence motion that the CCJ has deemed as validly passed in June, just recently. And ever since the opposition, as a matter of fact, more recently, the opposition leader was here yesterday, and he said, you are now a caretaker government. Therefore, you are not supposed to be engaging in certain things, but you are a caretaker government. How do you respond to that?
You know, there's a difference between a caretaker and an undertaker. If someone calls me a caretaker, I feel very good about that. If Mr. Jagdeo were in my position here today, they probably would have labeled it the undertaker government. And the Guyanese understand what you do when you are an undertaker. So I'm not going to be engaging him in his interpretation of what the CCJ ruled. I believe that we have accepted the orders of the CCJ. We believe that the CCJ is our final court of appeal, and the pronouncements of the court by way of orders have to be respected and obeyed. The CCJ has pronounced that as of June 18 last, that the no confidence motion was validly carried. We accept that ruling from the CCJ. CCJ has set out that in accordance with the Constitution, the President and the Cabinet ought to resign, but notwithstanding the no confidence motion, the passage of the no confidence motion, will continue in office for such a time as elections are held and a new government is sworn in. So the law and the Constitution do not anticipate a vacuum. You can't resign a government and a president. As Prime Minister, for example, if I consider that those rulings resigned me, I had to submit my resignation to the President. The President appointed me and all other members of Cabinet. But if the President had to resign,